This episode of Area Code Batavia is brought to you by Bulldog Plumbing Incorporated. For more information or to schedule an appointment, visit their website in the show notes or give them a call at 630-313-9109. This episode of Area Code Batavia is sponsored by Zen Loft Collective. Register now with the link in the show notes to receive $20 off a class or package using the discount code AREACODE. Hey everybody, you're listening to Area Code Batavia, a podcast about what it means to belong in Batavia. I am your host, Richard Clark. Today for the podcast, I continue my two-part series where I am interviewing the mayoral candidates for the April election. Today I'm talking to Jeff Schielke. Mayor Schelke has been serving for a long time, since 1981, actually. That makes him one of the longest serving mayors in the country. So he has seen a lot of Batavia, and most importantly, he's seen a lot of history firsthand. He has a sort of intimate knowledge of the history of Batavia because he's experienced, and his 6 generations of family that came before him have experienced Batavia history. He is known for that knowledge and really that love and passion for history. If you see him at any event, if you go to him at any context and strike up a conversation, he is extremely likely to talk to you about something that has happened in the history of Batavia. So I wanted to get to know him partially to figure out why that was. But I also wanted to get to know him specifically. I wanted to sort of challenge myself and challenge him a little bit to talk not so much about the history of Batavia, but his personal history and his personal motives in becoming mayor. I wanted to know what motivated his drive to become mayor at the time and what is driving him now to continue to serve as mayor. As I mentioned, this is a two-part series. I am not focused on their positions or sort of factual arguments for each candidate. I'm definitely not taking a position on who should be the mayor. What I wanted to do with this series is create an opportunity to get to know each candidate better as a person, their ambitions, their struggles, the growth they've had over time, and what drives them to want to serve in this kind of role. All right, here's my conversation with Batavia Mayor Jeffrey D. Schelke. How long have you been the mayor at this point?
44 years.
44 years, and that's near some kind of record,
No,
right?
no.
It's not near some kind of record.
Right there's the record. Right, the 3 guys standing there with myself down
Okay.
at the governor's mansion with Jerry Bennett, who's the mayor of Palos Hills. And he and I got elected to the mayor's job on the same day in 1981.
Nice.
So we've both been in office for 44 years. And there's a third one of us, and that's the mayor of Hillside.
Mm-hmm.
And he's got elected. So there's 3 mayors in Illinois that all got elected on the same day in 1981, and we all got 44 years in. The guy sitting there with the walker in front of him, he needed a walker. His name was Bob Butler, and he was the mayor of Marion, Illinois.
Okay.
And he had gotten elected the mayor of Marion when he was 30.
Yeah.
And when he was 91, he walked in one day and said, I cannot do this anymore. Here's my letter of resignation.
Yeah.
He resigned. That happened shortly after this picture was taken. We were all at the governor's office.
Okay. Yeah.
And
He's got the record.
he's got the record 61 years.
Okay. Yeah.
And nobody's ever going to break that. And all that take.
You're not going to break it.
No, I'm not aspiring to break it or anything else. I mean, that would be another. I'd have to be the mayor for 17 more years to get to that. That's 4 more terms.
It's possible.
Yeah.
It's doable.
Yeah.
So you were telling me on the phone that your family, generations of your family have lived here. How many? How many generations?
6.
6 generations of Schelkes, right? No.
Schelke's kind of came a few years after. The first generation was named last name of Jeffrey.
Okay.
Which is where my first name now comes from. I was named for them.
Yeah.
And let me stand up here. Mr. Jeffrey, who's right here, he and this gentleman, whose name was Myron Kinney, came to Batavia in about 1880.
Okay.
And they opened up a combination drugstore and pharmacy at River and Wilson, where the boardwalk shops are.
Yeah.
And so he was the pharmacist. They didn't have one in town when he got here.
Yeah.
And so you went in there, and the doctor in 1880, they didn't write out prescriptions, So below them is two pictures of apothecary jars, which I own. They're at my house.
Nice.
And those apothecary jars came from the 1893 World's Fair in Chicago, where my great-grandfather, Jeffrey, and another early pharmacist over in Naperville, who I believe's last name was Olson.
Yeah.
And I think his great-granddaughter is the gal that owns Anderson's bookstore in downtown Naperville to this day. Anyway, my great-grandfather and Mr. Olson were asked by the then just starting Northern Illinois Pharmacy Association if they would come to the World's Fair one day a week and sit at a table of which these apothecary jars sat alongside of them. And they were there to explain to people at the World's Fair some new thing called the prescription, where you would go to your doctor and the doctor would write out what you needed. And then you would come over to Kinney and Jeffries or Olson's in Naperville, and they most of the time could make you up something based on the prescription. And so that's kind of how they all got started. And
so this was how far removed from you? This was how many generations
before? This was my
before?
grandmother's father.
Okay, got it. So I'm sort of laughing because I think a lot of people want to know about you. And what's interesting is I think you're well known for this. When you ask you a question, you go into history. It's like a natural...
That's what I'm all history.
You're all history, which is really fascinating to me. I'm curious why that is. And I think I know. Like some of it is like you have lived a lot of history. It's deep in your bones. But like for you, like what is the big deal about history for you? Why is that so important?
Well, I think there's some very firm lessons to be learned from history at whatever level you are.
Have you learned lessons from history?
Oh, absolutely.
Like what?
Well, I mean, like remaking this town. Batavia of today was a totally different place in 1981 when I got elected mayor. And I didn't run on the platform that I'm going to change everything or fire everybody or whatever have you. There was some people surrounding me who had some visions of stuff like this building that we're sitting in had been, originally it was a windmill factory. And then in the 1940s, it was converted to a company by the name of Dunbar Capital. And they had a lot of experience with rubber products. And so in mid-1960s, they created a new division in the company called DK Aerospace because they had been contacted by the U.S. Space Administration that for some of the rockets and stuff, they needed some components made out of rubber that they could make. So I wasn't with the company, but this is what I'm told. So they started making things, and one of the things that they made was what they called the flexible fuel line, which was a fuel line you put into rockets that wouldn't break. It was always flexible. Some fuel lines were heavy, and if enough pulling on them, they'd break. Whereas these flexible lines would just bend with the times and go wherever.
And that was the company that was here in this building?
In this building. So in our council chambers, supposedly the flexible fuel line that was in the rocket that landed on the moon in 1969 was made downstairs there.
Wow.
And I've got a case at the back of the council chambers, which I haven't had the time yet to do. When the 3 astronauts came back from the moon, they collaborated with an author, and all 3 of them, none of them wrote it, but they all talked about their experiences in every given situation that occurred. And they wrote this book called First on the Moon, which I believe is up at the Batavia Public Library. It says right there in the book that the flexible fuel lines in the rocket were made in Batavia, Illinois.
The people that came before you, the generations in your family that were before, they stayed in Batavia. They kept staying, which is striking to me as someone who's lived in Alabama and then a little bit in Florida and then a little bit in Kentucky and then moved to Wheaton and then moved here. I'm a traveler. My wife is an Army brat, so she's been all over the place. And a lot of people are like that. And a lot of people are coming to Batavia, are new to Batavia. They haven't been here their entire lives. They certainly don't have multiple generations.
But they like what they feel and see.
I think so. I do, for sure. But I'm curious about what is it that for all of those years, which are a lot of years, multiple generations, what has kept that family here in Batavia, in your opinion? What kept your ancestors here?
Well, I think, going back to my great-grandfather who was the pharmacist, he had a sincerity about him that people liked. And when he built himself a new house over at the corner of Spring and Washington, on the northwest corner of that intersection. And when he built the house, he had a special radiator put in the dining room.
Yeah.
And so it used to be, this was before the phone and everything else, people, night and day, if you go and look, it's still there on the front door. It says Jeffrey, that inscribed in glass on the front door.
Okay.
So people would be sick or needed a prescription or whatever, they'd run to Mr. Jeffrey's house night and day, knock on the door, and he'd had his bedroom right in the first floor, right by the front door, and then he'd get up and get dressed and go down to this drugstore and get them what they thought they needed. Or many times he would be sitting there eating dinner. People would come and say, my son's sick, I need something right away. So he had this special radiator made that had a storage compartment in it. So he'd take his plate off the table, he'd put it in this radiator and go down and fill the prescription and come back, and his meal would still be hot because it was inside the radiator.
Yeah.
So then his daughter ended up marrying a German that lived out on East Wilson Street by the name of Schelke, and that's where my last name came from.
He was a German immigrant?
No, his father was.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
But he had a big family. He had another brother, but he had 5 or 6 sisters, and they were all Batavia girls.
Yeah.
And so I have a lot of cousins in town whose grandmothers were a Schelke at one time, and then they got married and had families. And I just had coffee this morning with one of my cousins at McDonald's, whose her grandmother married a guy by the name of Becker. And so all these families then expand and grow. And so I have quite a relation in Batavia from that side.
Did you ever consider moving?
Not really. I had no, I was very pleased with what was going on here. And it was interesting in my life growing up that Louise White, who the school's named after, she was one of the cousins that came out of the Jeffrey side of the family.
Okay, yeah.
And so her and her family had lived here from, 1850s or whatever it was. And so when I went to the old Louise White School, that was really one of the old buildings in town. And you could see that there was a need for some new schools to be built.
Yeah.
And so my mother was always a big one to jump on the referendums, like to build J.B. Nelson and to build the new.
She was always pro new school.
Alice Gustafson, and then Batavia's always had a tradition that we name the schools after prominent educators in the community.
This is a podcast about what it means to belong in Batavia. One of the questions I ask everybody is, when was the first time you remember feeling like you belonged in Batavia?
I know. I was born and raised there. I always have felt belonged, that I was part of the community. My grandfather had a store downtown. Yeah. It was a place where people knew you. And my mother's father came from Norway, and her mother was from Sweden, and they were Scandinavian immigrants, her parents.
What did your parents do, like as an occupation?
Well,
your dad owned the store.
No, my father was at the store, but then he left it and went down and joined All Steel Equipment in Aurora. And he was a foreman of the file line, I think it was, down there for 35 years or whatever. And my mother, she graduated from high school, but she never got any education beyond that. And so she worked specifically during World War II at several stores in downtown Aurora. I know there was a candy store down there that she worked at for a while. Yeah. And then after the war, my father came back to town, and he had been in World War II and had been heavy duty. He won the Bronze Star for his actions at Normandy. Yeah. And so they got married, and I was the result of that marriage. So.
Were your parents as passionate about Batavia as you are now?
I don't know. They certainly didn't do anything to dissuade me.
Okay.
My mother was very active in the women's club. I didn't have any sisters, but she had a good friend whose daughter was in the Girl Scouts, so she became a Girl Scout leader and all this other kind of good stuff. And then when I became an old Louise White School, I joined the Cub Scouts, and she became a den mother.
So she was really involved in a lot of things.
Yeah. But just to tell you a story about her, This is like 1956, maybe 57. And the world still had some different things. And we had at Louise White School, we had about a dozen black kids.
Okay.
Were up in the school.
Yeah.
And I had 3 in my class. And so they wanted to join the Cub Scouts. And right away, my mother said, well, I'll take those 3 kids.
Yeah.
And she took them into her Cub Scout den. And she always had refreshments, and she had them do stuff. And then she had them learning that they needed to go out in the community and clean things up. And there was a couple old senior citizens, the yards weren't maintained. And so she'd take us over there and we'd work on that. And she wanted them all to learn all these lessons about helping your community and serving people.
Yeah.
Well, as it turned out, all 3 are now dead. But all 3 of them, till the day they died, they had nothing but the highest of praise for my mother, that she really made them feel whole and made them feel part of the community, and they never felt discriminated against or anything else. Because when they were 6 years old, Mrs. Schelke took them into her Cub Scout den, and she really let them learn what being in the community and being a part of the community was all about.
So you watched your mom do that growing up?
Well, I mean, I was right there, and, I was doing anything. She did most of what she was doing, but somehow connecting to me. But, I think she took the greatest pride was that Cub Scout troop, because when they grew up, those 3 black guys came back to see her with regularity and bring her a present at Christmas or something.
Right.
We remember how she was. And there's a picture of them hanging in the one up there in the top frame there with the 2 people standing there with a knife. That's Mrs. Scheidler, who ran the youth center in Batavia, and that's the girl, Kathy McCullough, who was then the president, and the guy is Danny Davis, who was going to be the new president. Okay. And so they took a picture, which was in the newspaper, and Danny Davis was probably my mother's favorite kid because he could sing. And so every week he'd come, he'd learned a new song to sing to Mrs. Schelke.
Nice.
So
that's cool. Today's episode of Area Code Batavia is brought to you by Bulldog Plumbing. I don't know if you knew this, but Batavia has what is considered to be hard water. As a result, a lot of Batavia residents have a water softener installed in their house to solve some of the problems that come with hard water. We got a water softener soon after we moved into the house because we started noticing that there was a lot of buildup from the hard water. It was messing with our appliances. Our coffee maker started having weird flakes in it. It was strange. So we had to get that taken care of with a water softener. If you've had a water softener for more than 5 years, it's probably time for a tune-up. Bulldog Plumbing is offering a special $80 water softener tune-up that includes water testing and system optimization. So if you need a water softener tune-up or any other services, call Bulldog Plumbing at 630-313-9109 or click the link in the show notes. That's Bulldog Plumbing. Reliable, honest, local. Area Code Batavia is sponsored by Zen Loft Collective, where wellness thrives. It can be easy to set a bunch of goals for yourself in the new year. I think a lot of us are focused particularly on self-care and goals around wellness, and they can easily go by the wayside if you don't have the support of a community of people who are helping you to achieve those goals. One solution is Zen Loft Collective. It's located in downtown Batavia, and it's a vibrant wellness hub offering yoga, fitness classes, massage, and flexible space rentals for practitioners, creating a community where health and vitality thrive. Kelly and Emily are the women behind Zen Loft Collective, and they blend their personal experiences with professional expertise, helping women navigate transitions like fertility, pregnancy, childbirth, and menopause. They have a special offer for Area Code Batavia listeners. Go to the website, register for a class or a package, and use the code word Area Code, that's one word, for $20 off your first class or package. Check them out at zenloftcollective.com or click the link in the show notes. What was the moment that you were like, I want to do that? I want to go into public office.
I don't know if I had that moment.
This is crazy to me. So this is really interesting to me. You know so many things. You have so much knowledge, but you don't remember the moment you decided you wanted to go into public office.
Well, when I was a little kid, I always wanted to be a fireman.
Okay.
And so that's kind of in public. And the old
service.
The old fire chief, whose name was Bud Richter. We only had, the station was right down the street here, where next to where you just named the tavern, where it's right down the street here.
Sturdy Shelter?
Sturdy Shelter.
Yeah.
Right now, that big open area, that's where the fire station was.
Okay, yeah.
And so this fire station was there.
Yeah.
And they only
looked up to those people.
Well, there was only one guy on duty each day.
Okay.
They had 3 firemen, and they worked 24, and then you get off 48.
Yeah.
And then the chief was the extra guy.
Yeah. So at some point in between wanting to be a firefighter and becoming the mayor, you decided you wanted to do that. It sounds like you kind of stumbled into it a little bit, or
I don't know.
it happened organically.
Certain things happened for me just at the right time.
Okay.
One was I graduated from high school in 1967, and they had just opened the new Batavia High School. They had a referendum when I was a freshman, and voters approved it. So then they turned the old high school into the junior high, and that later was tore down to become the library.
Yeah. So it was it during high school that you started to become interested in politics?
Well, yeah, a little bit. But anyway, we got out there, and then Lucille Gustafson, she was running around campaigning for the idea that we needed to have a junior college.
Okay.
And so I knew her, and so she took me with her in a couple of places. And I want to say she spoke maybe area-wide for what now is the Wabansie District.
Yeah.
I bet you she spoke 150 times to the Rotary or the Women's Club or some church group or whatever have you.
Yeah.
And so as it turned out, it got approved, and they opened the first Wabansie in the fall of 67 when I had just graduated.
Yeah.
So I just enrolled in that, and then I was there for 2 years, got my first 60 years in school, and then I decided I'd go to Aurora University and get my bachelor's because it was right here, and tuitions weren't cheap in those days. Yeah. And I got through my first semester at Aurora, and lo and behold, I get called by the National Guard to come down to Joliet, that they have had a whole bunch of people now. We're on the waiting list, but now they don't want to be because Gerald Ford had ascended to the presidency, and he ended the war in Vietnam, and there was no more a demand for drafting people.
Okay, wow.
The National Guard said to me, we'll let you finish your first semester out in college, but don't sign up for a second semester because we're going to take you on active duty for 6 months, and then when you get back, you can return to what you're doing.
Yeah.
So that's what I did. I didn't go to my second semester of my junior year, but then the local newspaper was running around, and they said, gee, you're going to all these meetings and whatever. Would you like to be a reporter for us? So I started doing that. Well, then I didn't get on my active duty till April of 71.
Okay.
By the time I went down to Fort Polk, Louisiana, and went through a basic training, and then I went through combat infantryman school because that's what they needed in Illinois because they were dealing with the Martin Luther King riots and the Democratic Convention, and it was a wild and woolly time.
Yeah. So
anyway, I went all the way through infantryman school, and when I got out, the next semester for what should have been my senior year had already started. So basically, because of that experience, I lost a whole year of college. The newspaper says to me, well, if you're not going to be going to school, you want to come and work for us full time. So I started working. So then I start going to the county board meetings, and I do cover all these various governments and get to know the state representatives and all this good stuff.
So you start to see how it works.
Right, yeah. So then the police department used to have part-time cops.
Yeah.
And the guy that was the chief said to me, I'd like to have you come on. You got a lot to offer us. So he made me what they call an auxiliary police officer.
Okay.
And then shortly thereafter that, I got on the fire department as a volunteer fireman. So I had both public safety things going for me. And that certainly gave, but then in both instances, the chiefs were using me as their watchman at the city council meetings and everything because I was the newspaper guy. In addition, so at one time I had 4 different things going. I was an auxiliary policeman, a volunteer fireman, National Guard, and a newspaper reporter.
Yeah.
So that's how I got where I did.
Yeah.
And then, when I came back I found that I could keep all the jobs, but I couldn't go to school full time. So I started at Aurora taking like 1 or 2 classes a semester. I was never a full-time student. And it took me a few years to graduate from there, but I did it.
With a social science degree.
With a social science degree, and I since have been named a distinguished alumnus of all the schools I went to, Wabansie, Aurora, and then I also was named distinguished alumnus of Batavia High School in the first class.
It's interesting that you really just, your entire life circling these public service roles that you're sort of falling into, right?
Right.
And at the same time, though, you do go to school for social science.
Right.
What was your motivation behind that? In your mind,
well, I thought to be a good person, and most of the people I went to high school with were going to college.
Yeah.
And, I just thought it would be a good thing to have on my resume. So, the local schools were very good. And, I don't begrudge that at all.
I feel like social science is kind of like government politics adjacent, right?
Well, yeah. And the things I was doing off class, I was maybe only taking 1 class a semester.
Yeah.
So I could go and in the class, and the professors all knew who I was and what I was doing.
Yes,
so they would ask about why do you think that guy got arrested, or what was the story with this fire in Aurora last night, or whatever.
So you're in the know. You've always been in the know.
Right, I've known in the know. Yeah. So I got that going to me.
What has your time as mayor of Batavia taught you about yourself?
Well, you got to have patience with people. You've got to, you get some people that are probably calling you once or twice a month. And you have a big demand on things that you can do. And one thing I guess I have done somewhat successfully is I got asked to do some eulogies at funerals. Well, now it's very common that I'm doing eulogies at funerals.
Yeah.
And most of the time, people are very appreciative of what I say and whatever have you. And so that's been a big positive aspect of my life and my career for giving, But
that was a thing you had to learn.
Well, case in point, when Sam Rotolo, who the junior high is named after, he dies, and right away his daughter's on the phone to me, and she says, we're going to have a private funeral for Dad, but I know he would want you to do the eulogy. So I did that. And I don't want to get into all that, but that's just an example of many times here I've been asked to, because now, some of it's probably because I'm the mayor, but because I've got this background that they want to ask me to do something at a funeral or a memorial service or whatever. So
when you first started as mayor, did you struggle with patience? Was it something you had to grow in?
No,
So then what was something you did struggle with that you had to learn over time?
Well, I had been covering it from the newspaper end, so I kind of switched positions, and some of the people I had worked with and they are now in here asking me, tell me the real truth of what's going on here.
Yeah, you had to learn PR.
Right. You had to learn how to play the game. That's the best thing. But
are you playing the game right now?
No, you're just telling me.
But you have to do it, right? To some extent.
Well, you have to know, it's like I've had people ask me, what's the big requirements of the mayor's job? And I said, well, one of them is you got to have the availability of time.
Okay.
Because sitting here is one thing, but I've got a professional staff here that runs all the departments.
Yeah.
I don't really need to worry about them. They counsel with me and tell me who's quitting or what's going on or what they need or whatever. But I don't go in every day, and sit there and say, well, make this person do this. I don't go anywhere near that type of stuff. But what I do get is a whole bunch of people calling me saying, would you come to the Rotary meeting tonight and tell us about the new thing that's happening at this location or whatever?
Yeah.
And it's same with the churches, same with all the, the other groups in town that want to know.
Yeah.
And then we have regional groups of, CMA or Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning for the whole region, of which I'm the chairman of the Council of Mayors, which is a big responsibility. It takes a couple of days a month. I go into Chicago on the train, and we're doing some very interesting things in there.
Okay.
But
it sounds like presence is a big part of being
right. Well, you got to be there.
You got to be there.
If you're going to take these jobs, you better be prepared. And so as an example, last month I got asked, how many times were you out last month speaking at groups or going to a memorial service or whatever you're doing? It was 23 times.
Wow. Almost every day.
almost every day I was doing. Some days it was 2 or 3 things, so it multiplied. But when people know you and they know what you're doing and they can trust you and whatever have you. And then the other thing is I've become kind of a resource or a think tank for many of the mayors in the region because I'm chairman of the CMAP Council of Mayors, and they're the ones that oversee all the transportation funding and roads and everything else. So I get a lot of information. I'm on the IDOT group that makes the decision where the money is getting spent and who's getting it and all this other good stuff. And I try to be very open-minded and fair in that nobody can say that it's not. And then one of the things that happened to me, this picture I see hanging on the wall here of Mayor Daley. You see him there? And the other guy on the other side of him is Antonio Villaraigosa, who's the mayor of Los Angeles.
Okay.
Now, this is back, 20 years ago. And Daley got elected mayor of Chicago. And Daley, for some reason, decided that he needed to change Chicago thinking in there. And so one day out of the blue, I get a call from one of his aides asking me if I'll come into a meeting that they want to have in Chicago. He'd like to form a metropolitan mayor's caucus and have 4 or 5 meetings a year and invite all the mayors from the whole area and everybody tell them what's going on.
Yeah.
So I went in there and had a nice meeting with him. And right away he says, I said, well, right now I'm in the process of talking with Aldi grocery stores about building their corporate U.S. headquarters in Batavia.
Yeah.
And he says, boy, that's very interesting. I said, and the one thing Aldi is telling me that's a problem here is that the international airport terminal at O'Hare Airport is insufficient. And they're flying multiple numbers of people every week from Munich, Germany, over here to set this whole thing up. And many times it's very difficult for them to get through because of the way it's all being run in there. You need to do something to change that. You probably need a new runway. And so he says, would you be willing to go public and say this? I said, I guess so. So the next thing I know, I'm being invited by his office to come to his office on the 23rd of December. I forget what year this is. And they had a press conference with all the Chicago media sitting there, and I'm standing up there, and they gave me about 2 paragraphs of a speech to read in which he was going to announce that he was filing for the building of a new international airport terminal at O'Hare Airport, and it was being done at the encouragement of, and I had talked to the mayor of Naperville and the mayor of Aurora and the mayor of Northlake, Jeff Schielke. They had all said that they were supportive of it. So I, said in my little speech that was going on, and it all got done.
Yeah, that's cool.
And so, that's one of the things that I take great pride in that I was able to participate in. And, Batavia's benefited significantly because they've expanded the office, and we're kind of centrally located to the entire Chicago area, so they can have their big warehouse here, and they now have some other warehouses in other places, but they can probably serve those out of this facility they got in Batavia. It's a great job generator and tax provider for Batavia.
Yeah, you've gotten a lot done, and you seem to really enjoy the job. I am curious. I'm curious on a personal level. What is hard about the job? Like, what is the hardest thing about being the mayor?
Well, I think you have to form your mind so that you know that tomorrow may be a difficult day, that every day is not going to be perfect, and there's going to be something bad happening. And then another thing you need to form in your mind is, what are the civic organizations in a community that really can make a difference for the good in the town? Yeah. And one of the situations I'm dealing with right now is one of the real strengths of Batavia historically has always been the church community. Yeah. And not picking a particular religion, but just the whole idea of God and religion together. Right now, we've got some churches that are really having a rough time as far as membership, and people maybe leave them and go to another church, non-denominational or whatever's going on.
Yeah, so, tradition in general is kind of on the decline a little bit.
Right. Yeah. So I started a thing a couple of years ago, and we're just going to do it here in a couple of weeks. Yeah. We have a meeting of the Batavia Ministerial Association that I host, and I bring in here the city administrator, the police chief, and the fire chief, and then probably the community development director. and we talk about what are the problems we are facing in town and what are the things that you should kind of be aware of and know what's going on. And so they all seem to be very appreciative that we do that. And I'm told, well, there aren't many cities that do this. You know, I guess you have to be careful that you don't step over the separation of church and state. And we're not here dictating to any church anything. We're just sharing them how many new houses are being built or what crime problems happening or what drug issue is taking place. And we're giving them some real insights into the town that they're in. And everybody seems very appreciative to it.
So are either of those things, so you talked about sort of the unpredictability day by day, and then the different contingents and helping different contingents of people. Are those things you struggled with?
No, I don't struggle with them. I don't know what that would be. I mean, I'm very lucky. I go to Chicago in my other world in there, and I listen to all these mayors that got, they're laying off the fire department and the police department, and they don't have any sales tax, and they got all this crime going on. Or they got some bad pollution thing happening.
Are you just lucking out? Is that what's happening? Like, what's the difference?
Well, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'm in the right place at the right time.
Okay. Yeah.
And so, you know, I have a number of them say, oh, well, I hear you got this thing called the boardwalk shops, where you got these little buildings that got built by the high school fine arts team. I said, yep, we do. Could we come out there and look at that? So there, a bunch of them have been. They've also wanted to look at River Street and how we reconfigured that and what we do on Saturday morning. I say, well, if you really want to see this, you got to come down here on Saturday morning and see it. And that's, we should bring all the farmers in, and they're selling the produce. And, you know, we get people from all over the area come in for that one.
Is Batavia better than ever right now?
I don't want to say that, and I don't think I should as the mayor. But, I mean, we are, I think,
doing pretty good,
working in the right directions. And I'm truly blessed here to have a staff that truly understands the world, and like specifically the fire and police and the city administrator and the public works director. You know, they all know what is right and what is wrong, what needs to be done. Right now, we are experiencing a huge increase in ambulance service. In the last 2 years, we've exceeded over 5,000 calls for the Batavia Fire Department. The vast, vast majority of those calls are ambulance. We created, and I guess I should take some of the credit for this, when I was first elected, we recreated the ambulances in the 3 towns used to be run out of the funeral home. And you'd call them, and maybe they could find somebody to drive the ambulance to your call, and maybe you'd have to wait a long time before they'd get there. So I was part of a conversation, and they decided to try to run it out of the hospitals. So the Del Norte Community, they were 2 separate hospitals. Well, then I no sooner got elected than Community called me and said, this ambulance thing isn't working out for us here. We don't think we want it here. So then I called together the 3 mayors of the 3 towns and the fire chiefs, and that's when we made the decision to bring in a private contractor who would then station the ambulances in our fire stations. And that's the way it's been ever since. And I mean, right now we've, for all intent and purposes, we've got 2 ambulances in each town, but they're not exclusive at all to St. Charles, Geneva, Batavia. So that's central to the Tri-Cities. So a lot of things have kind of come together and worked very positively in our favor.
What keeps you up at night?
I'm pretty tired. I sleep pretty good. I don't really...
You don't worry about anything?
No, but I worry about stuff, but I don't... You know, I've always tried to keep it in my mind that what you're doing is you're going to do the right thing. And so, you know, you never have to worry about sneaking money away or giving somebody.
You don't have to worry about getting caught.
Nothing. I've never done anything that's going to caught me on anything. So, you know, I just try to do it the best I can and try to, you know, I guess one thing probably some people say, well, he's been in office too long. I mean, right now, these other 2 guys that I'm talking about, we're the longest serving mayors in the state of Illinois in office. And, you know, there's, in some respects, there's a good part of that because you certainly know the system and you know who the people are and how to get, in some instances, the money. And because of the situation I'm in, the other ones are talking to me about helping them get money, you know. And so
Batavia and being a mayor is such a big part of your identity. If you weren't the mayor, what would you be doing right now?
Well, I have a license. I work as a realtor selling houses.
Okay, yeah.
And I work for Baird Warner up in Geneva.
Okay.
And I was just working for them earlier today before I came back here because this is not a part-time job.
This is a part-time job.
This is a part-time job.
So you're doing this and you're selling
other
houses.
jobs, yeah.
You're selling houses in Batavia?
All over.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah, I don't try to sell houses in Batavia because then somebody's going to say, well, gee, you're doing it because you're going to change the zoning or
right.
know, so
conflict of interest stuff.
Yeah. But what I can serve in my office is I have a lot of my fellow agents up there are doing something in some town around here.
Yeah.
And they'll say, what do you know about why this is like this? And many times if I don't know, I know all the mayors. I can call them and say, what's the story here with this? And so they appreciate my presence.
Yeah. Interesting. Last question. To you, what does it mean to belong in Batavia?
Well, I think if you're going to come in here, you need to kind of marry yourself up to the identities that exist here, that you want to be a town booster. Okay. And you want to, cheer on the teams, and you want to support the library because we have an outstanding library. And we've really got a good school district, and we've got a good park district. Yeah. And so everything is kind of running on the right track right now. Yeah. And we don't want to go off and do crazy things, and you got to listen to what the others are saying, and you've got to, and then we got this church community, which is still there, and I'm hoping that we can do things that kind of keep it together and make it the strength that it's always been to Batavia. Uh-huh. I've had other mayors come in here and ask me that same question about, I'm missing something here in my town. What are you doing that helps me? And I say, well, one of the things that I try to do is communicate. Okay. And we have the Batavia magazine, and then sometimes if there's some real big thing happening, I'll create a little 15-minute program about the issue and do it on the computer, or I'll talk about stuff. Yeah. Yeah. And it's those moments of like a new awareness of what's happened in the town. It sort of increases the feeling of belonging over time. Right. What's really going on here and why it happened. Thanks for listening to Area Code Batavia. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another episode. If you enjoyed this podcast, you should absolutely subscribe to the newsletter. Not only will we let you know when a new episode is out, but you'll also receive a weekly list of 5 concrete ways to belong in Batavia. Just click the link in the show notes. Most importantly, if you know someone who would love to hear this podcast, please share it with them. Word of mouth is the best way to grow our community and help more people feel like they belong in Batavia, Illinois. Area Code Batavia is produced by Area Code Audio. It's hosted and produced by me, Richard Clark, with additional production help from Jennifer Clark. Edited and mixed by Matt Linder.